Welcome to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, where we explore big ideas with leading experts on how to grow your brand and business with targeted podcast interviews.
People will often ask us, is that a good podcast? What they really want to know, is that a good podcast for me? And that's what we're going to break down today. Today, we've got a special episode. We've got Diana Carter, who's one of our senior podcast relationship managers, sitting down with Max Millsaps. Now, Max is one of our senior prospectors. Internally, he's known as Super Max. He's the guy that connects great hosts and great guests. He's got a keen knack. He's been doing this for years and years and has great insights on how you can not only tell if a podcast is good, but if it's good for you.
Thanks, Tom. So, Max, you mentioned before how there's good versus good for you podcasts. How do you define a good podcast? What criteria do you use to evaluate its quality?
So I believe that a good podcast is defined by the quality of the content. So what I see as a good quality show or episode is one that has an engaging conversation between the host and the guest. Most of these times, it's less of an interview or a sales pitch, but it's a back and forth informative talk where listeners can really soak in the knowledge that both the guest and the host have and the information that's provided. And they can sit there and they can learn and grow based on what they've listened to.
So what distinguishes a podcast that is generally good from one that is specifically good for the individual listener?
So we've been doing this for quite some time, and we've learned a lot on the types of shows, the types of guests, the types of hosts. We've had a lot of time to experiment, to try things, and to learn. And one of the things that we've learned is that bigger does not necessarily mean better, but better means better. So I always say that there's a podcast out there for just about everybody. It doesn't matter what your interests are, what profession you're in. Like, there are extremely niche shows out there, and they're extremely broad shows. So the broad shows are going to be the bigger shows that cover a big, wide array of topics, of types of guests, of types of interviews, of types of everything. These are going to be the bigger shows. But let's say you are more of a niche type of guest that you want to narrow in on a certain audience. So in these broad shows, sure, it's going to be bigger. You're going to be speaking to more people. But the percentage of audience of this big broad show that you're looking for is going to be really, really, really small. So the bigger does not necessarily mean better. Meanwhile, if it is a show that is specifically good for your niche, it's narrowed down, and the percentage of the audience that's going to be the people that you're looking for is going to be much, much higher. So that's why we believe that better is better, not bigger is better.
Love it. Love it. So looking for those specific audiences in the specific types of shows that are targeting who you really want to be talking to. I love it. That's great. So how do you find podcasts that are the best fit for your thought leaders? Walk me through what that process looks like.
It's a pretty long process, especially at first. So we have a team that first goes through and researches shows based on criteria that we have. We want to make sure that we are getting the best quality shows for our thought leaders. And the team that researches will go through, they will comb through past topics that the show has covered. They will listen to how the host engages with the guest. They will review the quality of the audio, the quality of the video, if it is a video show as well. They will review the hosts and the show's social media presence, their engagement, and then from there decide if it's a show that will fit for our thought leaders. If it's not, then we will put it on a list of, yeah, it's a great show, but maybe it's not the best fit for us. If it is a show that we know we're going to get some really quality thought leaders on, the host and this guest are going to have a really great conversation, then we will make the fit. And that will then be entered into our database. So we have a database of a lot, a lot of shows out there. These are organized with keywords. These are organized with a bunch of different metrics for us to comb through and make that fit. So the very first line of defense for this is what we call prospector. The prospector will take the client, take their information, go through the database and read the description, go through past episodes of shows that were already in our database, and then make the fit. Say like, okay, I think guest A is going to be really, really great fit for this show because they want to talk about this topic and this show is specifically for this topic and we know it's the best fit. So the first line of defense is the prospector. They will make that connection. They'll make the fit. The next person to review that will be the client account manager. The client account manager is the person that knows the client the best. They work specifically with that client. They have one-on-ones with them. They're the client's best friend. The client account manager will then decide if it's a good fit or if it's a bad fit. If it's a good fit, great. It'll move on to the next step. And the next step will be the podcast relationship manager. The podcast relationship manager team is the team that is specifically in charge of reaching out to the hosts. They nurture the relationships with the hosts, and the hosts typically know who the podcast relationship manager is because they have an established relationship going back months, sometimes even years. And the podcast relationship manager knows the show, and they decide if it's a good fit or if it's a bad fit based on their past experiences with the show and with the host. And that is our 3-layer approach. It has to go through 3 pairs of eyes before it goes through into being an interview.
Wow. Yeah. When you lay it all out like that, it is like, whoa, this is a long process. That's awesome. So, can you share how a time when you discovered a podcast that wasn't just good in general, but specifically beneficial for your thought leader?
So we recently had a client who told us several times how they wanted to be on these big, broad shows. They wanted shows with a bunch of people. They wanted shows that were like big, that constantly bring up these big names. Like, I want to be on these big, big, big shows. And we told them, we're going to try to get you on these big shows, but also, how about we try some of these smaller niche shows that we believe are going to be perfect for them? And we kept telling about the approach I mentioned earlier about bigger isn't better, better is better. During this time, we did get them on one of these smaller, more funneled shows that fit the specific niche that this client wanted to be on, that this thought leader wanted to be on. And they later came back to us and they're like, you're right. They landed a client from one of the listeners in the smaller niche show, and they even recovered what their entire investment with podcast interview marketing was. And they told us, like, I had this really wonderful conversation with this host that knew exactly what it was that I do, that I want to talk to, and the audience was exactly who I wanted to talk to, and it was just a perfect fit, a perfect match. And they came back later and they're like, I'm sorry for wanting to be on these bigger shows. Yeah, it was a really great experience when that happened, and we were able to learn a lot from that experience and keep cementing our bigger isn't better type of mentality.
It's where the leads and the buyers are at that you want to be at. That's where you want to be, not necessarily in this, big, huge podcast space, which are great to be on too, as well. But those types of stories, when they're talking to the right person, and it has such great results, it's amazing. Love it. So in the realm of podcast interview marketing, Max, how do you ensure that guests' experience aligns with the interests and needs of a podcast's audience?
So we do a lot of research, both on the podcast side, but also on the guest side, on the thought leader side. We make sure that our guests are going to be high quality guests before they sign up with us. We want to make sure that they are the perfect fit for podcast interview marketing. We go through their social media, see their content that they post on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter. We go through YouTube and other platforms to see past speaking engagements so we can see how dynamic of a speaker they are. We go through their expertise to see if that will translate over to podcast interview marketing as well. And we try to make sure that they know what they're talking about and they will be able to provide really high quality interviews, high quality content for podcast hosts. And we want to make sure that these thought leaders get out there to as many people as we can get them to provide thought provoking conversations for the betterment of everyone.
So, when it comes to podcast interview marketing, what strategies have you found to be effective in reaching out and engaging with hosts?
So, one thing that I truly believe is that as we're progressing more and more into the future, we are losing a lot of our human touch in a lot of things. If you've had any experience with customer service in the past 5 years, you know a lot of it is done via automation. Like you don't know who you're talking to, you don't know if it's a human, you don't know if it's a robot, and we're losing a lot of our human touch in this world. We have automations and AI doing a lot. Like I'm sure almost everybody now has written an email with ChatGPT. And we're trying to keep that human touch as much as possible. We've seen it to be really effective to reach out and engage with hosts. And once we establish that relationship with a host, we try to nurture it as much as possible. We check in with them. We check their social media. If they post any great life accomplishment, we congratulate them. If they reach a milestone in one of their shows or episodes, we congratulate them. So we want to make sure that we are nurturing that relationship with human touch. And I mean, we're all humans. So we just try to establish that relationship and nurture it. And reaching out and engaging them takes a lot of that human touch. And
Can't replace the human touch at all, not at all. So we've talked a little bit about what we do in regards to reaching out to the hosts and building and nurturing that relationship, that one-on-one real relationship. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we don't necessarily want to do when we're talking with hosts or reaching out to hosts.
so there are a lot of mistakes and do nots that we can make. But one of our email etiquettes that we have is we're not going to be begging. We respect no's. We respect hosts' wishes because we don't want to impose. We don't want to be insistent. Like, hey, how about now? Hey, how about now? No, we don't want that. We respect your no. We respect when you are open to saying like, this isn't exactly who I'm looking for. We can ask, okay, who is it or what kind of client or guest are you looking for? And then maybe in the future we could revisit, but we don't beg. Another do not that we have is we try not to be cold in our emails. We try to make sure that, again, we keep our human touch with our emails. We want to foster these relationships. We want to be nice. And sometimes email isn't the best way to communicate. I could write, okay, sounds great. And it could sound really cold and maybe rude, or sometimes it could sound like really, really, okay, sounds great, enthusiastic. So email is not always the best way to communicate. And we know that, and we try to make sure that we are establishing these relationships and nurturing them via email, sometimes via Loom, via videos that we send to the hosts. So yeah, those are some of the no-nos is don't beg, accept a no, and don't be cold.
That's awesome, Max. So to wrap things up, looking back at your experience in finding podcasts for your clients, what lessons have you learned? Any final advice you'd like to give folks who are looking for podcasts in their marketing campaigns?
I think learning how to bounce off your content with other people that may not necessarily know what it is exactly you do, or maybe exactly informed on what it is you do, and learning how to create a meaningful conversation with a host, with a friend, with anybody you can see on the street. It's really important that you're able to learn how to have a meaningful conversation based on your expertise and learn how to communicate that I think that is the most important thing with podcast interview marketing is learning how to have a meaningful, thoughtful, informative conversation with anybody that you find.
I trust that gave you some actionable advice on how to find podcasts that are not only good, but good for you. You can find the extra resources back at podcastinterviewmarketing.com. And I wanted to share one final quote with you. I don't know who this came from, but I remember hearing it years ago. Stop complaining about finding a needle in a haystack. Go invest in a magnet. And it's so true. With 4+ million podcasts out there, it can be finding a needle in a haystack. But if you've got the right tools, it becomes easy.